Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some memories stick with you forever while others vanish almost instantly? Well, today we're diving deep into a fascinating study that uses a cool model called M3 to figure out exactly how our brains decide what to keep and what to toss. It is like a detective story for your memory. So what is this M3 thing? Think of it as a super detailed map of how we remember things. Most of the time we just look at whether someone got an answer right or wrong. But this study says that is not enough. There are different kinds of mistakes we make when we forget things, and each kind tells us something different about why our memory failed. For example, did you forget the exact item or did you forget where it was supposed to be? These are different kinds of memory slips. The scientists here are using a framework called the Memory Measurement Model, or M3, to break down these different response types. M3 looks at all the possible ways we can respond in a memory test, not just right or wrong. It assumes that our brain activates different bits of information for each response option. Then it uses a sort of competition rule to decide which option we actually choose. It is like a race where different parts of your memory are sending signals to try and win the race to be your answer. So how did they test this? They used two classic memory tests, the simple span and the complex span tasks. In a simple span task, you might be asked to remember a list of items like words or numbers. Then you are asked to recall one of them. The M3 model breaks down your answers into what they call item activation, which is how well you remember the item itself, and context binding, which is how well you remember the item in its specific place or time. Did you remember the word apple but forget it was the third word on the list? That is where item activation and context binding come into play. In the experiments they collected data on how often people gave three types of responses. There was the correct answer. Then there were other responses, which were still items they had studied, but from the wrong place. And finally, there were not presented lures, which were items they had never seen at all. The M3 model uses special math formulas to figure out how much activation each of these response types gets from memory. Scroll a correct plus Aother plus Eliors. Scroll these are the activation formulas. See the A and C. A is that item activation we talked about, how strong is your memory for the item itself. C is the context binding. How strongly is it tied to its specific spot? The B is a baseline activation, kind of like your tendency to guess, or just pick something if you have no other information. The correct answer gets a boost from both item memory and context binding. Other studied items still get item memory, but miss out on that context boost, and the lures only get that baseline guessing activation. This picture here really shows it. The correct answer has the tallest bar combining all three sources. The other studied items have a shorter bar missing the C part, and the lure has the shortest bar with only the B part. So M3 is giving us a way to see how strong these different memory components are. Now, there is a really interesting part of this model called the choice rule. It is how the model decides which answer you pick based on those activations. They looked at two main rules, the simple or linear choice rule and the softmax or exponential choice rule. The softmax rule is extra cool because it is mathematically similar to how signal detection theory works, which is another way scientists think about making decisions. After running their model, they compared which choice rule fit the data better. And guess what? The softmax rule was the winner. It did a better job of explaining people's responses, especially when people were making mistakes. This tells us that thinking about memory decisions as a kind of signal detection problem with a bit of randomness is a good way to go. They even used something called a Bayes factor to formally compare the models, and the softmax rule got a massive endorsement. So for this type of memory research, the softmax model seems to be the way to go. Then they moved on to the complex span tasks. This is where things get even more interesting. In complex span tasks, you have to do two things at once. You might be reading sentences and then have to remember words from those sentences. Or you might solve math problems and then remember letters. This extra processing task adds a lot more cognitive load. The M3 model for complex span has extra categories to account for specific kinds of errors. You can get the correct item, you can get a paired distractor, which was a distractor item from the same processing step as your target. Or you could get an other memorandum, which is a studied item from a different part of the list. Or an other distractor, which is a distractor from a different processing step. And of course, you can still get a not presented lure, scroll a closed dist, plus Aother dist, plus fuzz EY scroll. What is really neat here is the parameter F, which stands for filtering. This parameter tells us how well people can ignore the distractor information. If F is close to 0, it means people are great at filtering out distractions. If S close to 1, it means they're not so good at it. And the distractors are getting activated almost as strongly as the real memory items. In this study, they found that F was around 0.65. This means people are filtering out distractions to some extent, but not perfectly. Even when they knew which items were distractors beforehand, they still had trouble ignoring them. This is a really important finding for understanding how working memory handles interference. Now here is where the research gets really creative. The standard complex span model assumes that both item memory and context binding are equally affected by distractions. But what if they aren't? What if item memory is more easily distracted than context binding or vice versa? That is where the custom M3 comes in. These researchers created a custom version of the M3 model to test this exact question. Instead of one filtering parameter F, they used two separate parameters, RA and RC. RA controls how much item memory gets through to distractors, and RC controls how much context binding gets through. This allows for much more nuanced understanding of how distractions affect memory. And what did they find when they compared the standard model to their custom one? The custom model was much better. The data strongly supported the idea that item memory and context binding are affected by distractions differently. This is a big deal because it suggests that when we're trying to remember things and distractions are around our brain might be selectively protecting certain types of information. The results show that item memory RA transferred to distractors almost completely. But context binding RC was much more attenuated. This means that while we might remember the item itself pretty well, even with distractions, we're much more likely to lose track of its specific context. This could explain why we might recognize an object, but not remember where we saw it. Finally, they did something super important called parameter recovery. Think of this as a stress test for their model. They basically simulated data from their custom model with known parameter values to see if the model could accurately find those original values again. This is crucial because if the model can't even find parameters when it knows what they should be, then it is unlikely to find them accurately in real noisy data. It helps them trust their custom model. They found that their model did a good job of recovering the main group level parameters. However, when it came to individual participant levels, the ratio parameters RABA and RC were a bit harder to pin down. This makes sense because these parameters are only used when distractors are present, which might not happen in every single trial. This means that while the model is great at understanding memory processes, at a group level we might need more trials or more participants to get really precise estimates of individual differences in how people process distractions. This whole tutorial series shows us that M3 is a powerful tool. It can be used for standard memory tasks, but also customized to explore really specific theoretical questions, like how distractors affect different types of memory or how memory updates over time. The memory updating example in the appendix shows how they can even incorporate timing variables directly into the model. So what is the big takeaway? The M3 framework and the BMMR package give researchers a standardized way to go beyond simple accuracy scores and really dig into the cognitive processes behind memory. They show that breaking down errors is vital and that different models like the softmax choice rule and custom activation formulas can give us much deeper insights. For simple tasks, the standard simple span model is a great start. For tasks with distractors, the complex span version or a custom version might be needed. And always remember to do parameter recovery for custom models before you jump into analyzing your own data. In my opinion, this research is just brilliant. It moves us away from black and white thinking about memory and towards a much more nuanced understanding. The ability to customize the M3 model is what makes it so powerful. It means researchers can really tailor their questions to their specific experiments and theories. The difference between item memory and context binding and how they're affected by distractions is a really significant finding, and it could have implications for how we design educational materials or even how we understand conditions that affect memory. The limitation I see is what they themselves pointed out, that getting precise individual estimates for some parameters can be tricky. This means for individual different studies, we need to be mindful of sample size. And the number of trials, future research could really explore how these different memory components interact with things like attention or fatigue, and how they might change as we age. This study really highlights how complex and fascinating our memory system is. It is not just a recording device, it is an active process of activation, competition, and selection. I hope this walkthrough has demystified some of the cool work happening in cognitive psychology. If you found this deep dive into memory as fascinating as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you found most surprising, or if you have any questions about M3 or memory. And don't forget to subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more explorations into the human mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.